Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about best practices for communication. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what are some of the best practices for communication between businesses and software development companies? So it depends a little bit on the nature of the business and the development company. You usually say that today in no business should do no company should do business with an IT like a software development firm or any group like that without some type of SLA in place or similar sorts of things, because as you can probably tell, there is a lot of instances where software development companies, because there are basically no requirements today, like if as I like to say, if you treat software development the same way you treat contracts of, like if you go to a doctor or something like that, you have some guarantees that the person there has a medical license of some sort. You don't have that with software development. It's a little bit like construction in a sense. Maybe even construction work is a bad reference here, but you don't necessarily know what you're getting when you hire a software firm. And it's the same thing for software development. There are no rules, basically. So you can impose an SLA in order to make sure that there are certain requirements on what you need from the IT company that they need to adhere to. Then at least you're securing yourself a little bit more. That's not always feasible, but it is a very good practice. But if we talk in terms of just communication between businesses and software development, I would say that there are quite a lot of practices today that I feel are completely like, I mean, I'm gonna raise my hand and say I'm probably one of the first people, and I will gladly say that to basically anyone. On average, I think that the whole idea between sprint demos and like Scrum and so forth, it's the entire concept is invented by agile coaches for the sole purpose of keeping them employed. I've never, ever, 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 ever seen it turn out to be more effective than some of the other practices that I know of. It's just another flavor of doing it. So I'm not a big advocate of saying that that is best practice. Quite a lot of people will of course question this. The thing that I usually say is that if you look at how the product companies of IT, how they usually communicate with their stakeholders and so forth, you should have two groups that you're dealing with. Either you have business to business customers. In other words, you are dealing with another organization that has something very custom that they need. They're going to pay you a lot of money for it. It's like custom integrations or things like that, collaborative, basically business to business collaborations. And then you have business to customer or B2C, where you have communication towards your users usually. Now, what I usually argue is that whenever software developers, like the business to customers thing is to me like it's already a done deal. If you look at how the major IT brands today do business, and it's not just FANG companies, we're talking about games companies or any product. Basically, they have newsletters that they send out in order to inform about new features. Patch releases have become a thing now, which is pretty cool. I think that you can actually, like, you make patch notes where you say, hey, these things have been fixed, and then you make some small presentation in a newsletter or something similar where you showcase some of the features and so forth. And then of course you can do more live demos and things like that where people can get to talk to the development teams to get some like more intimate feedback going and discussions and so forth. And then you of course have my favorite, which is you have some type of communication channel. Now that's not necessarily for B2C because it can be quite hectic if you have to talk directly, if you have a really large user base. That's why I say like at least a newsletter is to me, and I think that I've never seen that be less effective than having sprint demos. I really don't like. I fucking hate sprint demos. It's the dumbest thing in my opinion. It's one of the dumbest things ever. Like, more often than not, you are pulling people in to a meeting to showcase something completely arbitrary that doesn't really have like much in terms of just to showcase that you did something. It's much more efficient, if you ask me, to send out a newsletter. You're more likely to get more people involved. You don't have to schedule, like, depending on how large. I mean, I've seen sprint demos where they literally are inviting like 100+ people. So 100+ people have to get into that one Teams call. so that they can see what's been released. And I go, that a board is unprofessional if you ask me. I send out a newsletter. Literally every single software company that you have an account for does the same. Like will do the same thing. You can subscribe for newsletters if you want to see the update. You don't get on. I mean, Google doesn't force all of us to get on a Teams call with them to figure out what the new features are for whatever products that they have. Usually, that's the thing that happens nowadays. It's more common in B2C, B2B. And here I usually say that the best strategy I find at the very least is that you put all the stakeholders that are related to the project in a direct communication channel. In other words, you do a cross collaboration type of thing. And that is my personal strategy for doing it, where my team, if we're talking about the software team and so forth, we have a Slack channel, Teams channel, call, or whatever, like some instant messaging channel where the stakeholders that we work for, from like our business collaborators and so forth, are present. And then it's extremely important that if you're doing usually integrations between two systems or similar things like that, it's very good practice to make sure that you have someone who is responsible on each side of the fence. In other words, you have contact people with contact details. They are all in some type of instant messaging channel with you. You have roughly an understanding of what work hours they have, if it's time zones or things like that that you need to account for, because when it comes to especially integrations, you can basically think of them as an extension of your own system. It doesn't really matter. My favorite one is like when you are downstream from a larger system. If your customer gets a worse user experience because of your upstream system, in this then you get blamed for it. I worked on many projects like that, guys, where I have integrations to other companies and they're not able to measure up for some reason. That's why the SLA is super important, and that's why you can basically try to think about them as a sub team, or like an extension of your own team. If you can't build up an effective communication channel with them, your product is going to suffer for it, no matter which side you are on the fence. It's always worse to be the end node, like be downstream, because basically the further downstream you go, the more like you are facing the music. Basically, you are the one who's going to take in all the requests and so forth and have to kick it all the way up. But apart from these things, when it comes to communication, one critical thing that is a little bit off topic, when I would say, is try to minimize the surface area of the connection between you. In other words, try to very early on establish, if it's an API or whatever you're doing, right, try to create an API client or something which is a very isolated part, very distinct within your system, that does this integration, or that connects to this external business. It's the same thing if you're doing things with like if you're building something for somebody. Try to scope things very clearly early on, so that you, for example, can say that here is an MVP and this is the thing we're going to ship for you in the first iteration and so forth, because it's really easy, if you don't consider that, to get to a point where your system starts rotting due to the fact that their system works in a certain way, especially in a point of integration. So make sure that you very clearly create interfaces between your system and the external, like the other systems, so that the communication between those two systems are basically nailed down and change as little as humanly possible. So what I want you to take away from this is that best practices for communication between business and software companies. Well, number one, always have an SLA if you're buying software. If it's custom made or something like that, never ever do business with someone who's not going to give you that, because that means that they're going to fuck things up. And if you can't hold them accountable, that's a really bad business for you. Like there are so many software companies and so many types of levels of developers and so forth. And most software companies these days literally are, as I call them, they're professional losers. Like they do business by failing at projects and then going to people who don't know what they're buying, and yeah, it's not a good strategy to not have an SLA of some sort. And then when it comes to communication, if it's B2C, use newsletters, try to make them nice. You can use templates and things like that, include a little bit of and like if you have graphics or things like that, you make it a relevant thing, because most people don't want, I promise you, the sprint demos, you can do that for internal stakeholders, for smaller group and stuff like that, for larger companies or for so forth. It's not an efficient way of working, at least not if you ask me personally. You can have sync ups and you can have like feedback sessions and stuff like that. You can even have a little public channel where people can connect with the development team if you want to for B2C. But on average, do it like the big boys. The big boys in IT, they send out newsletters. And then when it comes to B2C, where it's like integrations or things like that, when you're working very closely with customers, make sure that you have contact details to the people who are, if you're doing integrations and stuff like that, who have their fingers on the keyboards and stuff like that. Make sure that you scope things very early on. So if you're going to deliver something to them, make sure that they have some type of visualization or mock-up of like what is going to be the first MVP. So you create a very small proof of concept that showcases the idea. And if it comes to integrations between APIs and stuff like that, create an interface between you. Like create like to say, and a dedicated API client that connects to each other. Like it's just it's their little folder, quote unquote, in your source code or wherever, that everything that has to do with their system lives, so that you minimize the spread that the integration is going to have on the rest of your system. You can basically think about it as creating a pipeline between your two systems, and there's exactly one client to connect to these two systems, and you try to minimize the surface area of the integration. The reason why you want that is because it's very common that like these sorts of B2C integrations and also B2B integrations and these sorts of collaborations can be very troublesome, because if your system is super nice, everything is super perfect, and you have a ton of really great practices and their system is shit, then your system is going to be shit. So the easier it is for you to trace down where the bugs are coming from, where the problems are and things like that. If you can isolate it down to that point, so discovering if there's an issue with their system, because that question happens all the time, guys. You have no idea how many times a week I have to sit in a meeting with a team and try to figure out, is it our system or their system that is causing the issue? Because when the integration stops working for some reason, it becomes it's like a Cluedo, like a mystery. Okay, all right, there's a bunch of latency. All right, is it our system that is causing the latency or like the issue for the end user, or is it higher up, like upstream from them? And then it becomes that's the whole problem of microservices, basically. Okay, where within the chain of calls is the issue? So that's why you really want to nail down these things in terms of like having short paths to getting to the people who actually know how to debug these things and so forth. Try to have as few middlemen as possible. That's why having an instant messaging channel where you're all hanging out and things like that, and then having some basic API documentation for both systems is the way to go. And as I said, don't forget that SLA, if at all possible, because you have no idea how many priorities like one company may have versus another and so forth. You have no idea what quality of software developers they have in their company, but if you put some basic legal requirements with an SLA in place, then you are at least guaranteed that they will take you seriously. Have a great day.